is covered in this brown powder. And this is actually the spore powder. Spores are microscopic. To estimate the number of spores produced by one fruit body like that would be very difficult, but it's going to be in the trillions. Okay? These spores are so small and so light that they can travel around the globe on trade winds, and actually, they can start a new colony even in another country, effectively. They're carried up into the upper atmosphere on thermals. They've been found right in the outer envelope of the Earth's atmosphere, and I've even heard it said that they may have been discovered just outside of the Earth's atmospheric envelope. And the reason the cap is covered in spores is because due to very slow chemical reactions that take place in the mushroom, there's a slight heating effect which creates little thermals, and these incredibly microscopic spores swirl around the outside of the mushroom and end up stuck to the top of the fruit body. And if I were an insect walking across the top of this fruit body, these spores would be carried on my feet. I'd have millions on each foot, and I'd transfer it to other parts of the wood and other trees, and that may be one of the main ways in which it spreads. But this is the mushroom I was talking about earlier when we talked about the bees, because bees come and take spores from these ganodermas and actually carry them into the colonies where they myceliate, where they germinate into these thread-like cells. And they contribute lots of beneficial compounds to the atmosphere within the colony, antibacterial and antiviral compounds. So they're very much part of the immune system of bee colonies too. This particular Ganoderma grows on beech trees, and although we can see this beech tree is very much a rotten tree, and it's very much a dead tree, it's very much full of life in actual fact. It's as a wonderful gentleman called Ted Green, who used to be the conservation officer for Windsor Forest, told me. He said to me one day when I was on a training course with him, he said, "Fred, what's this?" And I said, "It's a tree, Ted." And he said, "No, it's not a tree. It's a high-rise apartment block for fungi and invertebrates." And so it is. These are just the fruiting bodies, and they're attached to very fine, microscopic, single-cellular width threads of a substance called mycelium, which is actually made up of very, very elongated cells. And that is the true mushroom organism. And it penetrates through all the tissue of the tree that you see. And in general, most of the trees in the forest are infected with different strains of mycelium, different species of fungi. It actually gets into them when they germinate from the seed, penetrates through the seed coat when the seed splits, and it lives and dwells within them through the entire lifetime of the trees. It only does things like this and starts fruiting and at the same time multiplying rapidly and breaking down dead wood when the tree's got a problem, when the tree is sick and the tissue of the tree is already starting to become softened and infected. So these types of fungi do not destroy trees, they just feed on the decaying material at the end of the tree's life. So this mushroom, this is the one I talked to you about earlier. This is the artist bracket, ancient Lingqi, or Lingqi, and here it is in its native habitat. Do you want to know why it's called an artist bracket?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is going to be a little tricky to film. It's going to require a steady hand, and it almost seems a shame, but it's not really going to do any harm. Come and watch my finger a second, okay? And watch this sponge-like spore-bearing surface underneath, and see what happens when I put some pressure on it with my fingernail. I can draw on it, you see? Now, everywhere I put some pressure, it creates lines. And people used to use this as an artist's medium, and it's still quite a tradition in some Eastern European countries today, where you'll find really large conchs like this one on the mantelpiece with very fine, almost similar to woodcuts or engravings of the landscape on them, and they've been varnished and lacquered, and they can be 100 years old or more. They get handed down in the family. Just need to do a little bit of... Here we go. You see the white areas underneath here, the white patches. That's mycelium breaking through. So these thin layers of white cottony material, that's the actual mushroom organism that's in the tree, showing itself, revealing itself through little patches in the bark. And here's some more here, and very soon fruiting bodies will appear. This is the common oyster mushroom. Okay, so it's a good edible mushroom, but it's also a source of the drug lovastatin, and of the first statin drugs that are used to reduce cholesterol in people who have high cholesterol. So they're used to block cholesterol synthesis in the liver. So here's a piece of beech wood, and behind me here I've got a decaying trunk from a beech tree that came down in the wind and has been sawn up on, on the side of the road. And just now I was saying that fungi produce fungicides to protect their colonies from other colonies of fungi. You can actually see that taking place here in this beechwood. This effect is known as spalting. These dark melanin-rich boundaries here are the boundaries of areas of mycelium, and you can see that the wood either side of the boundaries is a different colour. These are regions infected by different mycelium from different fungal colonies. So there you go, there's an example of it. Oh, this is rather lovely. There's a lovely colony on this side. Have a look down, have a look under there.
Yeah.
That's magnificent.
Look at that.
Wow. And it's so white. I mean, that's all brand new growth. Very, very active growth. Lovely. So we've got the remains of something here, but I'm afraid it's only remains. It's still worth a look, I guess. Remember earlier on we were looking at the dried fruit bodies of the honey mushroom, and there's obviously been an outbreak of honey mushroom in this tree. It may be because honey mushroom is it's a fungus that actually decays the tissue of living trees and damages them and sometimes kills them. It may be that that's what's infected the whole tree and caused it to snap off and blow over. And here we've got some dried fruit bodies that are well and truly on the way to decomposition in places, but this is actually honey mushroom. This is the remains of honey mushroom that's bursting out of this big crack in the tree trunk here. So it proves it's in there, and if you came back to this tree trunk at, in the right week of the year, it was probably going to be covered, very, very harvestable. And honey mushroom, in addition to being a medicinal mushroom, is also a delicious edible mushroom, but it does have to be cooked. It's not safe to eat raw. It's slightly toxic if you eat it raw. It's a real favourite with rustic Italian cookery, and also in Polish cookery too. And in both countries it's pickled, but in different ways. I'll be around, and they'll be somewhere. Ah, here we go. So the rhizomorphs of the honey fungus that we saw the fruit bodies of right the way up there near the top of the tree are these black bootlace-like things. They're a bit like roots, but they're not roots. They're actually fungus. And they're bundles of fungus mycelium, dense bundles of hyphae. Hyphae are the thread-like cells. A honey fungus uses this to colonise. It actually travels through the soil looking for new food sources. And once it reaches a tree, and goes, yeah, yum yum, and off it goes. It penetrates into the tree and starts literally going up inside the bark, and mycelium grows out from there and colonises the living tissue. Down in the leaf litter here, beneath the beech trees, you can see here you've got the seed husks here of the beech moss, the nuts of the beech tree. We're under the canopy of the beech forest. The ground is alive with mycelium. It can feel that I am kneeling here. It has some sort of I'm going to call it sentience, although some people might argue with the definition, but because it makes its living by decomposing the things that fall on the ground, it's pressure sensitive, and therefore it knows where every footstep that you place on the forest floor is. It knows where you are. So in a cubic metre of soil like this in the forest floor, there can be hundreds of thousands of little insects called springtails, for example. The mycelium of the deceiver mushroom is predatory upon these springtails and secretes a toxin which anaesthetises them, so that they literally grind to a halt in their daily ruminations in the soil. They come to a standstill, and the mycelium colonises them and digests them. it strips them of nitrogen-rich compounds. And those nitrogen-rich compounds are then fed across the mycelium into the surrounding tree roots, where they're used to build new compounds by the trees. So the nitrogenous material is broken down and fed to the trees. And in return, the trees feed carbohydrates, carbon-rich material, back into the mycelium, which gives it some of the stuff that it needs to make sugars and things like this, to make polysaccharides. So there's this mutual exchange, but not many people think of mycelium as predatory. In fact, not many people think that mycelium is pressure sensitive, or that mycelium even exists, because you don't see it most of the time. You're completely unaware of it. But it's important to understand that even though we can't see it, it's pretty much everywhere. In its vast diversity, this microorganism, this range of microorganisms, thousands and thousands of species, is pretty much everywhere. And it's breaking down big molecules and feeding them into the plant kingdom, and in return taking something for its effort. It's part of the great cycle, of the nutrient cycle. If we damage that mycelial layer, we will actually jeopardize the whole ecology of our planet. So we need to start thinking about the fact that it exists even if we can't see it. We need to start acting in a way where we don't damage the mycosphere in order to preserve the integrity of the ecology of this planet for the future.